Hello and welcome back to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast. I'm Dr. Nerida, founder of the My Happy Horse Nutrition app, lifelong student of horses and someone who cannot be expected to remain professional if there is a cute foal nose within 50 metres. In this episode, I'm joined again by Jess, an equine science student from Charles Sturt University, who recently spent a week with me for work placement. Jess is about to start work in an equine breeding centre, and as she had many questions about feeding broodmares, we decided we would turn them into a Q&A episode. This is such an important topic because feeding a broodmare isn't just about keeping the mare looking well. The way we feed her can influence her foal's development, joint health, immune function, microbiome, and even future performance potential. We talk about the old idea of feeding for two and why that's not quite right, especially in early pregnancy. But we also discuss why a balanced diet from the very beginning matters so much, because there are some developmental windows where if a nutrient is missing, you may not be able to fix the consequences later. We cover copper, iodine, calcium, phosphorus, protein, lysine, lactation, milk production, foal growth, microbiome development, and some of the things that can go wrong when broodmare nutrition isn't quite right. So whether you're breeding one much-loved foal or managing multiple herds of mares, this episode is a practical look at how to feed the mare in a way that gives both her and her foal the best possible start. Let's dive right on in. Jess, welcome back to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast.
Thank you for having me back.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's good to have you. So in the last episode we did with you, we chatted all things or lots of things dental health. And this episode, we're going to be talking about pregnant and lactating broodmares. And the context, so you shared a little bit with me off air, the context for that is that you've taken a job with a stud farm.
Yes, and doing a whole lot of AI, breeding tech, all of that kind of stuff. And being a mum myself, I found it very interesting from a human nutrition perspective, how much changes and how much doesn't actually change between pregnancy and not being pregnant. So it will be interesting to see that through a horse nutrition perspective as well.
Yep. Oh, good. I love this. I love this subject. So there's so much we can influence definitely during pregnancy and also a lot we can do to help the mare and the foal during lactation. And it's also probably, I did an episode on weanlings there a few weeks back, and I said, yeah, the weanlings are one group of horses that I've spent probably the most time with in my career, but broodmares are probably up there with them. You know, like I've spent so much time on breeding farms here and overseas. So I've got lots of on the ground experience with this one, and yeah, there's lots to know. So let's dive in and get some of these questions done.
All right. So my first question, probably about the myth of eating for two once, well, humans as well as, but mares being pregnant. So I've heard a lot of people in the industry will feed for two from day one of pregnancy. However, I've heard in my studies that you really only need additional nutrition from the last trimester. So where do we sit on that?
So both are correct and neither are correct. There's a balance, as there nearly always is in nutrition. So in early pregnancy, it is very true that you don't need to be feeding extra calories and protein because the fetus is so tiny that it's not really drawing down on the mare's energy reserves or protein reserves at that stage. Like it's just a lot of cell division. I don't know if you were the same in early pregnancy, but man, it's tiring, that stage.
That's exhausting.
I remember going, how does something so small make me so tired? Like I'd literally just lie on the floor after lunch and pass out asleep because I was so knackered. Yeah, it's a fascinating process, that early pregnancy stage, but it doesn't need a lot of, I mean, it obviously uses energy because it makes us really tired, but it doesn't use energy as in if we just eat the same normal amount that we're eating before we're pregnant, we're not suddenly going to start losing weight. And the mares are the same. So if their calorie requirements virtually don't change during the first trimester of pregnancy, and protein requirements virtually don't change. That part's true. They don't need to eat for two in those early stages. The bit that's not true is that we run the risk if we don't supplement them in that stage properly with vitamins and minerals, we run the risk of things going really wrong. And there's windows. And this is the thing that we don't understand really well in horses, but we understand it enough in humans to know that there is these windows that we need to be really conscious of certain nutrients. And if we miss those windows, it's too late to do anything about it. So spina bifida is a classic example of this. To the point, so spina bifida is a neural tube defect caused by folic acid deficiency in humans, and which I know you know because you've had kids, and everyone who's had kids knows that because it's drilled into us so much. But it's actually, in Australia at least, we have folic acid added into bread, so that if women fall pregnant and they don't realise and they eat bread, so there's still holes in this, but it's better than not having it. They'll still have got a good chance of getting their folic acid requirement met, and it will reduce the incidence of spina bifida and other neural tube defect diseases, because the window where that folic acid is really important is that really early stage of pregnancy. And unfortunately, like if you have a baby that develops folic acid deficient in that stage, you can give that baby all the folic acid in the world and you cannot fix that problem later. It seems to be the same with things like copper in foals. So if you have got a foal born to a copper deficient mare, they will have a higher risk of OCD lesion, and supplementing them as a weanling doesn't fix it. There was a study, it's reasonably old now, and I'd love someone to repeat this study, but there was a study done where they had mares that were copper supplemented, mares that were not copper supplemented, and then they all had foals. And then they split. It's been a long week. Jess and I've been doing data entry all week. I think my brain's broken. But they split the groups of foals then. So they took the supplemented mares and split their foals in two, and they supplemented some foals and didn't supplement some as weanlings. And then they took the unsupplemented mares and they gave some of them copper and the others not. So the foals that came from the unsupplemented mares had a higher risk of OCD, so developmental orthopedic disease, where the bone at the joint surface doesn't form properly, so you end up like with a soft patch. When they start pounding their joints together, you'll actually break that little, like it's a soft spot in their joint, and then you get joint mice, like bits of cartilage floating around in their joint. And the foals that were from the unsupplemented mares had a higher risk of that condition occurring, and supplementing them with copper, supplementing the weanlings with copper, did not change that. So if you miss that in pregnancy, then you can't fix it later, and we don't know where that happens. So that could be one of those things that they need to have enough copper when they're very early pregnant. So it used to be, and it's not so much a thing now. So when I first started working as a nutritionist, like early 2000s, it was much more common to see broodmares not supplemented at all in early pregnancy. It's not as common now, particularly in the standardbred and thoroughbred industries. Most people will supplement them all the way through. But it was pretty common to go, they're early pregnant, we'll just stick them out the back and leave them until later in pregnancy. But what I worry about if we do that is we don't know when these windows are. So we don't, maybe it is in that really early stage of pregnancy that they need to have that copper supplementation to then reduce the risk of OCD later. They don't need to eat for two from a energy and protein perspective. You need to make sure that they're on a balanced diet. But the reality is, before that mare becomes pregnant, they should be on a balanced diet. There is no time where I would go, it's okay not to feed a balanced diet. So you do need to be really conscious of that in early pregnancy.
Yeah. And this kind of leads into the next question I've got is, how does the feeding of the mare during pregnancy affect the foal? So obviously we've got things like copper. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else we're aware of?
Yes, lots of things. So the one that jumps immediately to mind is iodine deficiency. So if you have a mare who is iodine deficient during pregnancy, best case scenario is, you can have foals that they'll be born and appear normal, because this is just the way, there's a bell curve. There's always the animals on each end of the curve, so you can have them where they appear normal. But what often happens with iodine deficiency, sometimes you'll see goiter, so the swelling of the thyroid gland, but you'll normally see flexural limb deformities. And so they'll come out with really wonky legs, and that's not good. We don't want them to come out like that. And we see that in regions that are iodine deficient. And the other time we see it is when mares are fed high nitrate hay. So nitrate has some relationship to thyroid function, iodine, but we also see this flexural limb deformity from foals that have been fed from mares on high nitrate hays or pastures. Hay is worse though, because it's like, frozen at a certain point of nitrate. So if you've harvested hay, or if you bought hay that's high in nitrate, and that's what the mares are getting, then their hay is always high nitrate, whereas pasture fluxes. So it'll be high in the morning and it'll drop in the afternoon, and sunny days it might be hardly there at all, and cloudy or windy days it'll spike, but it goes up and down. So it's not as bad with pasture. Still something you should be aware of, but hay, if there was anything you were going to test if you have broodmares just on hay, it would be nitrate content for me, because if you go above about 3,000 parts per million of nitrate, you'll start to get abortions. So definitely affects the foal. And iodine deficiency, it's my sad story, and it's actually one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about doing what I do, is I can really tell this story without crying, so you'll have to forgive me if I do, but if I had my horse as a kid was Coco, so I got her when I was 8 years old, and I just absolutely loved that horse, and she absolutely loved me. And when I went to uni, I was like, right, perfect, I'll get her in foal, because I really wanted to breed a foal. And I knew nothing about nutrition. No one in my family knew anything about horse nutrition, and there was horses bred in the area, and we just kind of did what everyone else did, and you just got your horse pregnant and then they ate grass, and that was it. And it was the longest 11 months of my life waiting for her to foal, and when she did foal, the foal was dead, and it just busted me. It was just, I remember Dad actually woke me up in the morning and he's like, she's had her foal and it's dead, and it just it's just shattered me. And I didn't realise at the time, and it sort of wasn't something, well, I didn't think about it because I didn't know any better, but I then went, the universe kind of conspired to have me do a PhD in horse nutrition, and then I started working with lots of breeding farms and lots of work in the Hunter Valley, which is, the area where we were, and realised how much of a problem iodine deficiency is there. And one of the things that drives me so much is I will never know, had that mare been supplemented with iodine, whether that foal would have survived. It was a little filly foal too. And she's exactly like her mum, and except dead. And I can't go back and fix that now, because I didn't know any better. And it sucks, that not knowing whether something could have changed. So, there's feeding broodmares is so important, because it has massive implications. And, she was a one-off foal that didn't work out, which is, huge loss. But then, there's lots of foals that are bred for lots of reasons. Some of them very, very valuable from a monetary perspective, and some of them very, very valuable from a sentimental perspective. So making sure that the mare has got everything she needs to give birth to a viable foal that is also really healthy is so important. And you can't go back and change it. Once pregnancy's done, if you've stuffed something up, broodmare nutrition is not hard. You just have to make sure you're feeding them balanced diet, which I had no idea about. And we had no idea that, there was severe iodine deficiency. And it's really interesting. Goats have got really high iodine requirements. And my brother, who's actually a PhD meat scientist, he has boar goats in Armidale, New South Wales, and he did feed them like horse, very different nutrient requirements to sheep. But he would feed them horse balancer pellets, and one year he didn't for some reason, and all of a sudden there's all these babies being born with goiter, and they're being born dead, and they're being born with wonky legs, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is all the stuff we see in foals. but to a much more, like it was far more dramatic in the baby goats. But it really reinforced to me just how important that one mineral is. And it's one mineral that if you're conscious of feeding a balanced diet, you'll definitely pick it up. And it is one of the things that My Happy Horse will pick up for you for a pregnant mare, because their iodine requirements are really high. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. What additional considerations do you need to think about when feeding a pregnant mare?
Lots. So one of the hardest things for the pregnant mares is making sure that they're getting the nutrients they need without making them overweight. So it's always, nutrition is a puzzle, and it's also a balance. So you want to make sure that you're giving them the nutrients they need without overfeeding them, because a really overweight mare is not healthy. And there seems to be a tendency for overweight mares to have foals that have more leg problems as well. And I don't know. I've never been able to figure out whether it's because overweight mares then don't get fed. So they go, "You're too fat. I'm not feeding you anything." And then you get flexural limb deformities because you've also got iodine deficiency, or whether it is actually a thing that they're so overweight that they're actually squashing their foal.
Yeah.
So that's important, is to use the right feed to make sure that you're meeting all of their vitamin and mineral requirements without overdoing their calorie requirements. So if you've got good quality pasture, often all people feed is a balancer pellet, because it's easy. If you're feeding big groups of brood mares, it's easy to go out and put balancer pellet out. You often don't need, when you've got good quality forage, you often don't need to feed very much feed. But then on the flip side of that, another thing that you have to be conscious of, and you'll be well aware of this, having had babies, is that when you've got a giant baby sitting inside your abdomen, there is not very much room for food.
Your meals are very small. It was actually going to be my next question, is how do you balance the forage requirement with such a limited physical space?
Because this is really only a thing when you get into that last trimester. So the last trimester, things start to get a little bit real with broodmare nutrition, and you do have to be really conscious of making sure that you're getting enough calories and protein into them. Because I don't know if you've seen in any of your classes, like the weight gain acceleration of a foal in that last trimester is massive. They sort of poke along, they're little things, and then all of a sudden that takes a lot of energy. Like all that cell division and important stuff that happens when you're making the eyes and the heart and the liver and the this and the that, all the pieces, putting it together doesn't take a lot of calories to do that, or protein, because they're not actually creating bulk. They're just creating all the pieces. But then in that last trimester, its job is just to go, okay, you're this big now, you need to be this big, so that you can be born and get up and run around pretty much as soon as you hit the ground. So their requirements shoot up in that last trimester, but their appetite, well, maybe their appetite doesn't change, but their physical space to have forage in their diet decreases. So it's still really important to have them on a predominantly forage-based diet, because they're horses, and that's what all horse diets should look like. And depending on the mare, so some mares don't need a lot of feed. They're such good doers. So Popcorn's mum was a really good example of that. Exactly the same build as her, like chunky, solid, beautiful Australian stock horses. And she went through her entire pregnancy with Popcorn on very little feed, because she's just naturally a thrifty horse. Whereas broodmares in Japan, it's freezing cold. They live in the snow. They're outdoors a lot of the time. They do come in, but they are outdoors a lot of the time. So their calorie requirements are high anyway, because it's, can be minus 20 degrees Celsius. And they're on hay-based diets, which tend to be lower calorie, lower protein than what a really good pasture-based diet would be. So we do need to bring in, 3-4 kilos of feed a day for them alongside their forage, so that we can make sure that we meet their calorie requirements and make sure that they're maintaining body condition. But their gut health is super important for a couple of reasons. So one of the very first trip I made to Japan. I was just telling someone this the other day because it's great. It was a funny shift. Funny, not funny, but the first time I went over there, the mares that they were bringing out for me to look at were thin, like ribby, no top line. They're like really struggling to maintain weight once they'd had a foal. And then the last trip, the mares they were bringing to me as their problem mares were overweight. So we'd gone from one extreme to the other. But the shift was that we'd taken them from they were using an imported feed, not from Australia, that still had a lot of cracked corn in it. So these mares were eating a feed that was literally going into their hindgut and obliterating their fibre fermenting bacteria. They just didn't have much of a fibre fermenting workforce in order to extract energy from the hay that they were eating. So they're really struggling to maintain weight because they're getting weight from their hard feed. Sorry, they're getting energy from their hard feed, but they weren't able to extract much out of their hay. And now we've changed them to a diet that's produced locally in Japan. It's like really digestible because it's cooked well. We use enzymes to make sure that it's like really digestible for all of them, and a lot more hay and a bigger variety of hay and things like that, and a bigger variety of fibre. And now they're like doing so well that we've gone the other way, and now we're having to manage some of the horses on the other end of the scale that are too overweight. But it is really important so that they can, because they're not eating as nearly as much forage. So a normal horse that's not pregnant wandering around will eat somewhere between 2 and 3% of the body weight. Your pregnant mares will come down somewhere around 1.8% because they just physically can't
fit it in
anymore in. And yet their nutrient requirements have gone up. So they need to now eat a much more energy and protein dense diet. But the other thing that's really interesting with pregnancy is that during pregnancy, the mare will actually program her foal to know what microbes are good and which ones aren't. So this is not during the birth process where they essentially hand them the microbes. It's during pregnancy. At some point in time, the mare will communicate, or I should say like the mother of an animal, because we do the same thing, is communicated somehow in utero that this microbe, this microbe, this microbe, this microbe, they're all good. You're allowed to keep them in your gut. But then if one's come in that animal doesn't recognise, it'll kick him out. So it's this host microbe interaction. And there's a researcher I want to do a whole podcast with this on, but the studies in dairy cattle where they take all the rumen contents out of multiple dairy cows that are cannulated so you can get directly to their rumens, and they take all the rumen contents out, wash the rumens down as much as they can to take as much of the microbe content out as they can, and then they swap everyone's rumen contents around. So, cow A gets cow C's and cow D gets cow B's, and within a matter of weeks they had shifted back almost to what they were before they swapped them around.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It's freaky. But it's very inconvenient because you then have to be really conscious of, well, what is that mare's microbiome? And this is when their nutrition becomes really important, because if you're not feeding that mare in a way that is supporting her gut health, she's now training your next generation what a healthy gut looks like. So if you give her a healthy gut by feeding her, if you give her an unhealthy gut by feeding her poorly during pregnancy, you've now created a horse that is potentially going to have an unhealthy gut for life. It's very inconvenient.
Very.
But it's also if you're feeding brood mares in a way that supports their overall health, then you've also given them the best chance of having a healthy gut too. Lots of forage, variety of forage, be careful with grain, don't feed uncooked grain. All those things that we talk about for maintaining gut health, all those rules stick for pregnant brood mares, and you've got extra motivation and reason to be conscious of it because you want that foal to be born with as healthy a hindgut as you possibly can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sorry, I'm going to add another little piece onto that, as if that is not big enough already. But there's also really cool research now that shows that the microbiome of a foal at 28 days has an impact on, this is in racehorses, but on their racing performance when they're, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 year olds, but so whatever they've got at 28 days has a
Mm.
future impact on performance.
That's really cool.
Yes.
It's really, really cool.
To me, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but it's also like it's just mind-blowing thinking about that. And it puts so much more weight on, what happens during pregnancy is so important for the rest of that foal's life.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I love talking about the microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
Just dug my teeth into that with insulin resistance
Mhm.
and
Yep.
the groups of microbes that contribute to that. So
To insulin resistance. Interesting. So was there like equine research on that
Yep.
now?
yeah. In short, the research was adapting horses to different diets, assessing how that affected their insulin resistance, and then assessing the microbiome after that through fecal testing.
Yep.
And so they've actually managed to link groups of microbes back to insulin regulation.
Okay. So I wonder, I'll have to read the paper.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, because there's like interactions in there that would be really hard to separate out. Because I know
Yep.
Professor Simon Bailey, so Uni of Melbourne, did work years ago now, but showing that if you increase a horse's weight with starch-based feeds versus fibre-based feeds, then the starch-based ones would become more insulin resistant.
Yeah.
And that diet would also potentially change the microbiome.
Yeah. Well, they did.
So it's a bit chicken and egg.
Yeah, and they did a similar one, Bamford, who I think is also Uni of Melbourne.
Same time.
And they did the same with a high carbohydrate diet versus a high fat diet. And the horses made fat off a high fat diet were actually not insulin resistant at all. But the horses made fat off a high carbohydrate diet were majority insulin resistant.
Yeah. And then I'll have to read the paper because it's really hard to separate out did the diet cause both the change in insulin resistance and the change in the microbiome separately, or did the diet change the microbiome and then the microbiome changed the insulin sensitivity? Which there is definitely research in other species to support that the microbiome is changing the insulin sensitivity of horses. Yeah. Oh, I love it.
It's so good. Feeding the lactating mare, what transfers through to the foal through the milk in terms of nutrients?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So lots does. I mean, there's obviously lots of calories in mare's milk. So it's really high in lactose, mare's milk. And it frustrates me, actually. I've got a tin of milk powder in my cupboard that was for a kangaroo. And Swiss, oh my goodness, I love baby kangaroos. We were looking after it for Orla, who normally does the Q&As for me. And it's a low lactose formulation, but then also suggests it's for foals. I'm like, no, it's the worst thing for a foal. So it's maybe a lesser known fact that milk is not milk. So mare's milk and human milk is actually really similar. But you look at even cow's milk and sheep's milk. I mean, they're both ruminants, but sheep's milk is way more concentrated than cow's milk. And same with goats. Like we have Clover and Manny, the goats here. They're my CEOs. We've got lots of C-suite animals around here, but they're the chief edibles officers of My Happy Horse. They just eat everything. When we were feeding them as the potty red little goats, the concentration of milk in there, it was like soupy, because it was so concentrated versus calf's milk. So it's mare's milk is just really, really high in lactose. So it's a sweet milk, and that's where the foals get a majority of their energy. So energy is a definite one that comes through. Protein is the other big one. So lots and lots of really high quality milk protein in there, and this is why they can grow. They grow at over 1 kilo a day, upwards of 1.5 kilos when they're really, really young. They absolutely fly as horses that will mature around 550 kilos. The other big ones are your macro minerals, so your calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, or your bone minerals. There must be sodium in there, and it had a weird, and it was many years ago, so I've forgotten most of the details now, but mares who must have been on really low sodium pastures and also had no access to salt, and their foals became really sodium deficient. it was really, and it took me a while. I remember it took me a while to actually figure out what was going on. Like, what is wrong with these foals? But when we gave the mares access to salt, then the foals were okay, because that must have been transferring through. But there's lots that doesn't transfer through. So things like iron, we know that from raising human babies. You get to 6 months and the advice is that you have to start getting some solids into them because there's not enough iron in milk and copper and zinc. So nutrients like that, nature is very clever because they know that the foal is going to need a source of those. And this comes back to broodmare nutrition as well. So when in that last trimester, the other thing that the foal is taking from its mother is a lot of those minerals. So it'll start to gather up copper, zinc, manganese, iron, and store it in their liver. So when they're born, they've got about 3 months worth of those nutrients on board, and they can exist. I mean, foals will nibble at their mother's feed and they'll nibble at pasture and stuff, but they're not eating enough. It's a little bit like a baby chewing a rusk, like they're chewing on it, but they're not actually getting enough into them to contribute to their nutrition. At the 3-month mark, they do start needing to eat other foods because they're not getting everything they need from the milk. So the milk continues to be a big source of energy, protein, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, all those nutrients, but they have to start eating pasture and hay, and if they'll often eat alongside their mum. If their mum's getting a balance of pellet, or broodmares will often be getting fed more than just a balance of pellet when they're lactating, depending on what their pasture is like. And so they'll start to get a source of those. And when they're grazing, they'll be eating soil, and there's some of their iron, which is important for young horses. They get a lot of their iron because they actually eat inadvertently soil as they're grazing. But it makes that conversation about broodmare nutrition important, because if you take a broodmare right through pregnancy and you don't give her an extra supply of those nutrients, particularly in that last trimester, then the foal will take from her, because they're like little parasites, right? They will take from their mother whatever they need. And then your mare ends up in a bad situation because she becomes really deficient in those nutrients, and you don't want that to happen.
No. And I wonder then if that is a driving factor for the weaning of the foals. Biologically, are they feeling that they're missing those nutrients and that's what drives them to graze? Or is it something like the urge to chew? Like what drives weaning?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's not like they don't wean at that age as such, because they're only, and you leave horses in the wild and the mare will wean them much later than what we wean them when we're producing them.
A beginning to the process, is that?
I guess it's just a beginning of the process of becoming an individual being, and every animal species has to have that process because you can't be constantly raising a baby. So yeah, I mean, it definitely is part of the process. What drives it is just, I don't know, millions of years of evolution going. You need the same thing as, what drives them to hop up off the ground and run. They just innately know that they need to be able to run to get away from danger, and they innately know that they want to chew. And they'll go, foals, you'll see soon enough. They will want to chew on everything. They're like kids. They mouth lots of things. So mouthing things, and then they watch, and their mother will teach them what is good to eat and what's not, that is really important in our modern weaning systems. It's really important not to wean a foal onto new feed, partly because you want their gastrointestinal tract to have adapted to what you're going to wean them onto, and it's not, big change from now I don't have mum and I'm having to eat a new feed. And also too, they get to be taught by their mother that this is actually safe to eat, and they learn that it's the same as human kids. They say that to get a human kid to eat a food, just eat it in front of them 20, 30 times, and they'll eventually go, they've eaten that this many times and they haven't died. They're not actually thinking this, but our evolution teaches us that if we see someone else eating something consistently and they're not dropping dead, it's probably not a poison berry. And then they'll pick it up and eat it. I don't know why, potato chips and lollies, they don't have to see 30 times. It's like once. Broccoli, though?
Oh, I remember eating strawberries one day and picking a strawberry up and then just having it taken out of my hand. And then I went for the next one and the same thing happened. And then by the time I got to the bottom of a punnet of strawberries, I think I'd had 2 strawberries.
Oh, yeah. There's sweet, yeah, so sweet things. I did find like the process of watching kids, like my human kids, going from being that, toddler that you're passing them food and they're eating it. And to May, my daughter, there was a point in time where I went, there is literally no food I've given this kid that she won't eat. And then I got a lesson in that's not because you're a good mother, it's just because she just ate everything because I had Bo. And the joke was that he would eat anything as long as it was pear or butternut pumpkin. That was it. But they naturally, as toddlers, so they'll often eat a lot as babies without really thinking about it. And then as toddlers, they start dropping, did you notice this with your kids? They start dropping all these foods out because that's when they can move around as cave babies. And if they just randomly started grabbing things and putting them in their mouth, they would be dead. So it was the cautious ones that survived, and it's still so wired into their little brains to be cautious. But this is way off topic, but it just is so, it just is another demonstration of how powerful that process of evolution is and how much we need to honour that, because you can't force them to eat stuff at that age. You have to just wait for them to get through that stage. And
Thing at that stage?
well, no.
Oh, gosh.
Hey, just jumping in for a second. I hear so many stories of horse owners awake in the middle of the night researching what to feed that I seriously think we should start the 3 a.m. horse feeding club, where the horses are asleep, you're wide awake, and Google is absolutely not helping. If you're an eligible member, you already know the drill. The worry doesn't go away by reading more articles. It goes away when you have a clear, personalised plan for your horse that you actually trust. That's exactly what My Happy Horse gives you. A few taps and you'll know exactly what your horse needs and why. Check it out at myhappy.horse or on the App Store. Now, where were we?
Feeding the lactating and pregnant mare. So if you short cycle a mare and put her in foal in her foal heat, how does that affect? So obviously she's supporting milk production for a foal, but now also needs all of those micronutrients and trace minerals for this new pregnancy.
Yep. So, I mean, this is really common in probably 90% of pregnant mares, lactating mares that I work with are also pregnant because, even if you don't short cycle them, like you're getting them in foal at some point in their 4, 5, 6 month long lactation period. And I think the requirement for lactation is well and truly high enough to also meet the requirement for that early stage of pregnancy. And we really don't see mares that are still lactating into that late stage of pregnancy. Like everyone who is running a breeding farm will have weaned by then. And you might get some maybe in a really good season in nature, but I'm pretty sure if you followed wild horses, you would see that the mares know, and they know that they need to wean their foal, and they will wean their foal.
Right, it's time. Get off.
Yeah, they will. They'll tell them they just won't let them feed. But normally what we would see is that the mares will be, usually maximum 6 or 7 months pregnant. So they haven't hit that stage where their requirements for energy and protein really go up. And the way that I formulate lactating mare diets, and certainly the way that the My Happy Horse app will give you, like the nutrient requirements that it will give you for lactating mares, they're well and truly high enough in the nutrients that are important for early pregnancy to cover their requirements. So it's I don't really spend any time thinking about that, because I know in covering one, you've also got the other one covered. Yeah. And it's good. You just have to make sure you've got your lactating mare requirements met.
Yeah. Because those babies are thirsty.
Yeah, man, they drink. They do. It's a phenomenal amount of milk, and you look at lactating mares and some of the harder diets. So pregnant mare diets are reasonably easy to balance, all things remaining equal. You don't have any curveballs with your forage or whatever that you're trying to deal with. But lactating brood mares on poor quality pasture, man, it takes something to meet their protein and lysine requirements. Like their protein and lysine, let's say lysine being the episode that just came out, must be episode 52, is all about protein quality, and lysine being the first limiting amino acid. It can be really hard to meet a lactating brood mare's requirement for that. But the cool thing about lactating broodmares is that they will show you if you're not meeting their protein requirement. So sometimes we can be guilty as nutritionists of saying energy is the only nutrient you can actually see. It's not quite true, because you can see protein. And what'll happen when you're not meeting a lactating mare's requirement for protein is she is so doggedly determined to provide milk for her foal that she will literally break her own muscle protein down in order to make milk. And that's when you see like those tent-backed mares and the mares that lose muscle over their rump. If you see a broodmare looking like that, you know that her protein requirement's not being met, and she's having to use her own body reserves to provide milk for her foal. So if you ran an analysis on that diet, you would see either that the protein intake is too low, or that the protein quality is too low, and you're not actually meeting her requirement for essential amino acids, and then she has to break down her muscle just to get those amino acids to make milk.
Yeah. So it was lysine, you said, wasn't it? Yeah. Lysine is the limiting amino acid for milk production.
We tend to, I don't even know if we know the answer to that question, but we tend to talk about lysine as the most limiting amino acid, so the one that horses will run out of first. The reality is we don't know a whole lot. We know a lot more now than what we used to, but it's not like poultry nutrition where we know so much about the individual amino acids, but it is the one we track, because it is the one that we have the requirement for from the NRC. It's the one that we track. But it may not be, you could be feeding a feed that has been fortified with plenty of lysine, but there's not enough methionine. And so it will be. So it doesn't have to always be one amino acid that they run out of first. Can be any of the essential amino acids, but it's just that lysine gets all the attention.
Of course it does.
It's a good reason, because it is normally the one they run out of first, but it doesn't always have to be. Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of finesse that has to happen with mare and foal nutrition. And we've discussed a little bit, but what can go wrong with getting the nutrition wrong?
Good question. Lots. Lots can go wrong. What are the biggest things? So probably it's a lot of my work with foals and lactating mares has been with thoroughbreds, and like a vast majority of it is with thoroughbreds. Lots also with standard breds and warm bloods, but if you had to put a number on it, thoroughbreds is definitely the top one. And because it's thoroughbreds and the way that they're sold and the way that we radiograph their joints before we're sold, we're like hyper focused on joint health with those foals as they're growing. And the thing that comes to mind fastest when we talk about what can go wrong is their joints can go wrong. And something that I have seen quite a lot is that if you feed your mares too much, or if they're on pasture that is really high in quality and you're not controlling their hard feed intake, they will make so much milk that their foals grow so fast that the growth of their long bones, so their long leg bones, outstrips the growth of their tendon, and then they'll get what they call contracted tendons. It's not actually that their tendon's contracting. It's just that the tendon isn't able to keep up with the rate of growth of the bone. And then they'll do what they call, they go over at the knees. So when it's really slight, and it's funny, like I see this in foals all the time because I'm looking for it, but when it's really slight, you'll just see a foal standing there with straight legs, but then every now and again his little knee will just pop forward and you go, you're growing a bit too fast there, mister. And so you know that you need to cut them back. When it gets really bad, it's like pronounced, their knee is way out in front of where it should be and they're kind of walking around on tippy toes. And then that doesn't do any good for anything. But it's just a rate of growth problem. So if you're seeing that in your foals, your mares are producing too much milk. It's not easy to control milk production sometimes. Like distinctly remember a season that it was just such an incredible spring season. Like there was green grass everywhere and it was like really, really high quality right at the time when lots of mares were foaling and they're like in peak lactation and there's all these foals that were popping over at the knees. And we literally were like pulling these brood mares back to just balance a pellet and still having the problem because it was so hard to control and we'd have to move them to different pastures and stuff. But you don't normally see it that badly, but that is one thing to keep an eye out for, is just making sure you're not overfeeding the mare and then the foal is growing too quickly. The other thing that can go wrong that I've seen the most is there's a window sort of between, like, they get most of what they need from their mother up to 3 months. And then between 3 months and whenever you wean them, they're getting some of what they need from their mother, but the rest of it has to come from pasture and hay and hard feed and whatever you're giving them. And what we find in a lot of improved pastures, and particularly ones that have been fertilised with phosphorus, is that you'll actually get more phosphorus in the pasture than you have calcium. So if you're not aware of that and you've got these foals that are still on their mothers and some of the nutrient is coming from milk and some of the nutrient is coming from pasture, and the pasture is really unbalanced. Like, some of the pastures have got a calcium phosphorus ratio as low as 0.29 to 1.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's like extreme. It's not just a little bit unbalanced, it's extreme. And it's hard in that. That's my trickiest window, is because you're still feeding them alongside the mare. So if you've got a mare that won't let her foal feed, and that foal is existing largely on pasture and the bit of milk it's still getting, then the potential for calcium deficiency in that foal is quite high. That's tricky. And I still don't have a neat solution for that problem other than creep feeding, but then that introduces
Its own set.
Yeah. Yeah. And, depending on the country and the labour available and the setups on farms and stuff, that gets really hard sometimes.
It's a very interesting period to look at nutritionally, behaviourally, physically.
It's high stakes, and I think I know what you do with your broodmares, it does have a really big impact on the future potential of the foal. It's not even from a performance perspective. So I've bred, and this is N equals 2, so take this with a grain of salt, but I've bred 2 foals from 2 mares that came from less than ideal situations. So Coco, the mare that I was talking about before, the horse that I had from when I was 8, I had her from when she was 6 months old until she was in her late 20s. And her joints were shot to pieces in her late teens. Like, you could hear them, and you could tell, like, she just didn't feel like she used to feel, because she couldn't run. It's a little bit like how I feel at the moment. Can't run the way I used to run because things hurt. But and then Keela, Popcorn's mum, she was the same. She was actually an orphan red foal, so she really had a less than ideal start to life, and she was worse. Like, her joints got quite bad towards the end. Yet they're foals who have both been bred on good diets and have been supplemented correctly, like, for their whole life. I mean, he'll be 23 this year. So that's Coco's foal. So she had the foal that she lost, and then she'd have, like, a number of years later, I bred her again and got Poet, who I'll take you out to meet in a little bit. He's a pest and we love him. But he's 23 and he still floats in his canter. Like, and there's not, like, there is not a joint creak in him. And Popcorn's, he hasn't done a lot of work. Popcorn's done a lot of work as a interschools horse and pony club horse, and like kids ride horses that cruise around.
Yes, I do.
They jump them, and they do a lot of work. And yet they're both the sound as a bell. And who knows? But it's such a dramatic difference from their mothers, who I know were not supplemented as youngsters. That it just makes me think, man, it's just, it makes such a big difference to the lifetime health of their joints, not just as, a racehorse needing to have clean joints, but as these horses that we breed because we love them and we want to have them around for 20, 30, in Breeze's case, nearly 40 years. That broodmare nutrition is so, so important.
And especially if mentioning the microbiome again, if that's what they then, you can give them a new microbiome and they still revert back to what they essentially left the mare with.
Yeah.
You're then setting them up for life.
We think that's probably probably is what happens. And I really hope that someone picks that, and I'm sure that they will, that sort of stuff up in horses and starts to do that research. Because there was, and I know I've mentioned this foal before in podcast, but there was a foal the last time I went to Japan. They bought normally just the problem ones. One of the farms one year tried to bring every weanling to me, and it was it was crazy. It was like speed dating weanlings. But
Gee, that sounds awful.
it is pretty. They are very cute, but man, after you've looked at that many legs in a couple of hours, your head kind of breaks. But this one they bought because for me to have a look at, because it had diarrhea its entire life. And so I'd started, like, I was just becoming aware of this thing where, if the broodmare doesn't have a healthy microbiome, then the foals aren't likely to have a healthy microbiome. So I said to them, did it have antibiotics as a youngster? Which, this is something that you wipe that microbiome out. And in fact, that same study that found the effective performance, the 28-day microbiome, was related to performance later in life. They also found that it had a massive impact on respiratory disease, and there was something else too. But definitely they were more prone to respiratory disease with a loss of diversity in their microbiome at 28 days. So that was the first question I asked. Well, did he have antibiotics when he was a foal? No. I was like, well, did the mare have any antibiotics? And initially they said, no, we don't think so. And then someone comes back and goes, she had surgery. She had colic surgery. And I went, that's interesting, because she would have had bucket loads of antibiotics after colic surgery. So, and that just kind of really, I mean, it's such a stark example of, while she was pregnant with that foal, it was such a stark example of, during pregnancy, she had heaps of antibiotics. And it's really hard to recover your microbiome when you get really hammered with antibiotics. And then, he showing up and having these symptoms. But so, I don't know, so much is heritable, and the microbiome is just one of those pieces. And if there was one thing, like if I was to breed a mare again, I'd be like, I don't know that I could do it, because I'd be too maniacal about making sure that they had a healthy microbiome. I'd be testing their microbiome, which you can do. And it maybe, and this is something that does my head in a little bit with recipient mares. There's all these people breeding incredibly expensive foals from recipient mares. You've got no idea what the microbiome of that recipient mare is like, and they've often now come out of racing. So if I was to breed, and this might be something you do in your new job, is suggest this to people. If I was to be breeding and considering using a recipient mare, I'd want to make very sure that mare had a healthy microbiome, because your foal's not going to get its mother's microbiome. It's going to get its recipient mare's microbiome, and that will have a big impact on that foal for its entire life. So you can test now in Australia down to species level, and I'll put the link to the lab that can do that in the show notes for this podcast. But that would be, without question, I would do that if I was breeding from a recipient mare.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just everything that's heritable and passed through, and the decisions you make before something is even conceived or transferred or impregnated has such an impact on the life of the being that you're bringing into the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it makes a lot of sense out of, sorry, we do need to stop for time wise, but I'll say this and then we'll finish up. But it makes a lot of sense out of epigenetics, because we know that things get passed down like for generations. And when you think about that from a microbiome perspective, it makes so much sense that you can pass on all of these different traits, like obesity in mice, for example. They know that the obesity can be passed down like the 3 generations. And it makes sense from a microbiome perspective that can happen. Anyway, we could talk about this forever, Jess.
Clearly.
So thank you very much for all of your questions.
And thank you for having me and answering them.
It's been a pleasure. And and hopefully we'll maybe after you've been in your job for a while and you've actually been in the thick of breeding, we'll have you back on and have a bit more of a chat about broodmares.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Very good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to know more about the My Happy Horse Nutrition app and how it can help you create personalised nutrition for your horse, grab the download link straight from the show notes or head over to myhappy.horse. And while you're there, check out Dr. Nerida AI. That's me in AI format, ready to answer your horse nutrition questions even in the middle of the night. Thank you for being here, and I will catch you in the next episode.